Happy Friday, Hokie Nation. As always, welcome back to another edition of the Friday Q&A. The Hokies are rolling 2-3, coming off a huge win in NC State against the Wolfpack. We're here answering all your burning questions. So as always, I'm Robert Bateman, joined alongside by Chris Coleman. And behind the scenes, clicking the buttons, is Nick Brown. As always, you ready to get into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, before our first question, if you want to be featured on next week's video, drop any questions you have down below. And also check out all of our socials at Tech Sideline. All right, so first question comes from Hokie94 CPA, who wants to know, so a GM will run football, and I suppose the AD will run everything else. Who's going to decide how that $229 million gets allocated between the two sides of the AD?
That's a great question. And, it's still difficult to tell what the flow chart is going to be. I expect whoever is the athletic director, whether it's still Witt or whether it's someone else, they're going to have orders from above to say, here's how much football's getting, and here's how much everybody else is getting. So I don't think you at this point, with throwing so much money into the athletic department, you can do it otherwise. I don't think you could hire an athletic director or keep Witt, if that's what you want to do, and just let them do whatever they want. I think that's a job. The prerequisite is to spend this on football. Here's what you have for everything else. So I think it's pretty much that board who's going to decide that. But it's just the whole process. There's so many things that still have to fall into place. Obviously, it's everything's being done out of order, unfortunately. But because of this process, it started months before, or even a couple of years before, like it probably should have. I think that there could have been a little more order to all this chaos, but because they have to do everything in just a few months, it's going to look disjointed and things like that. So it's one of those things where we have to look at it on December 1st and see what it looks like then, and then make a judgment.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's going to figure itself out as time goes on. Our next question comes from Jock from Quebec, who asked, so in your preseason poll, you ranked Virginia Tech 8th in the ACC. After one game in the conference, where would you place the Hokies right now, and where do you think they'll end up?
Yeah, it's looking like a bold prediction right now. I think the schedule's difficult. So they've got Georgia Tech, who's ranked, Miami, who's ranked, Florida State, who's ranked, UVA, who's ranked. Is Louisville ranked?
No. They're not ranked, but they're not a pushover.
Right, they're certainly not a pushover. They're receiving votes. So, Tech could potentially play 5 ranked teams this year. That's why you really need to beat Wake Forest tomorrow. You really need to beat Cal on that Friday night. And maybe if you can steal one of those other ones, you can finish 4-4. But I would have to say my prediction of 8th is looking a little optimistic right now. Put them outside the top 10 probably in their final finish.
Okay. Well, our next question comes from Patriotic Puffin 97, who wondered, we've seen multiple transfers come in and make a big difference in the last few weeks. So I'm curious, who do you think has been the most impactful?
Virginia Tech, their one meaningful win this year was against NC State. And even though Terrion Stewart's only had a meaningful impact in one game this year, it was in that game. So I'm going to go Terrion Stewart. I think, he dominated that game, and the Hokies wouldn't have won it without him. Honorable mention is probably, you look on the defensive side of the ball, and a number of those transfer linemen have really made a big impact. Cody Heisman is actually the highest grader on defense this year per PFF. Elijah Fall has played well at that defensive line role. So that's where I would look. I would look Terrion Stewart and then a few of those defensive linemen.
I got to ask about Christian Ellis. I actually thought he was the name you were going to drop. I thought he was phenomenal.
Yeah, he was. Those 2 plays were fantastic. Hopefully he can keep up that level of play. So, you could throw him in there too, but Terrion Stewart's still got to be my number 1 pick.
All right, our next question comes from Rich Bisaccia Burner, who said, in terms of content, who do you think would be the most entertaining coaching hire?
In terms of content, I don't know, maybe somebody like PJ Fleck.
Okay.
Row that boat.
Yeah.
He could be a possibility. It doesn't, as far as realistic hires, first of all, I don't think any crazy guys are realistic hires.
So you don't see the John Grudens, Michael Vicks of the world?
No, absolutely no chance. I would see that happening. Now, I do think Fleck has maybe calmed down a little bit as he's gotten older. He was fairly, not I don't want to say demonstrative, but he was a quote machine early in his career, and He kind of seems to have calmed that down at this point. Maybe it's the fact that he just coaches at Minnesota and not a lot of people pay attention. So who really knows? I think these days most coaches are pretty good at just sticking to the generic stuff during their weekly press conferences. Ironically, probably Shane Beamer is the one. Shane is kind of an emotional guy, and sometimes he'll have some comments that are not off the wall, but he clearly sometimes speaks from the heart rather than the head. So he would probably be the biggest quote machine if he were to be hired, but I don't think that's realistic.
So Shane Beamer would be getting Nick Brown to make the graphics. Got it. I'm curious about this. If you could choose a head coach that's, really mentally smart, kind of locked into the game, very like dull with the media, or a coach that kind of like Dan Campbell kind of guy, where he gets into a press conference, says everything he feels, like, which would you choose between those two guys?
You've got to strike a balance, I think. I mean, there's certain things as a head coach that fans want you to say that you just can't say. But at the same time, there's a little bit to be said for openness and honesty and things like that. Pry was, for the most part, pretty darn honest during his tenure as head coach. Obviously, that didn't work out. When it comes down to it, they can go in there and say absolutely nothing, and I don't care as long as they win. I've never actually watched like a Matt Campbell interview. I'm sure when I do a coaching candidate profile on him, I'll watch some of them then, obviously. But he seems to like strike the right balance as far as just my perception.
All right. Well, before we get into our last question, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Manage your money with ease. First Bank and Trust Company's industry-leading digital banking experience provides you with all the essential tools to manage your full banking relationship from one convenient platform. Access digital banking through the online banking login on desktop and tablet devices, or on the go through the First Bank and Trust Company mobile banking app. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Choose First Bank and Trust Company with over 30 locations in Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. So, our last question today comes from Thomas Smith, who said, why is beer $15 at a football game?
Clearly the most important question that we've ever fielded on the video Q&A. Ultimately, it's $15 because people are willing to pay for it. You wonder how much ticket prices are. You wonder how much Hokie Club membership is for certain levels. And ultimately, prices are set because people are willing to pay for it. I was in the club seats for the spring game, and I'd forgotten that beer was expensive, and I just went up and bought a beer, and they're like, "Okay, $15," and I'm like, "Oh man, forgot about that."
We're on the pockets a little bit.
So I had my one beer at the spring game, and then didn't have any more after that. I'm not gonna say like I have drank a beer at Tech football games and things like that, but I don't do it very often. I remember when I went to the World Series in Atlanta in 2021, and the beers were like $16 or whatever, and I had no issue at all paying that because I'm at the World Series. It's expensive enough to buy tickets, so what's a little extra for beer costs and things like that. Ultimately, prices are set to where people will pay for them, and it's one of those things. Also, from a fan. From an atmosphere standpoint, I don't want them to be so cheap where half the stadium is out of their seats trying to get beer the whole time. And I think that takes away from the atmosphere to a certain extent. Maybe 15 is a little much, though.
Okay, so we actually did a little research before the episode. If you made Virginia Tech the 33rd NFL team, they would rank 32nd, only being ahead of another local team, the Washington Commanders, who charge $16.49 per game.
Gosh.
The average cost in the NFL is $10.75, and the Bengals top the list with $6.80.
Well, historically, you needed a bunch of beer to watch the Commanders play until recently. So, but man, that's it. That's really expensive.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking. Well, once again, be sure to check out all of our socials. Look back on the YouTube page at Tech Sideline if you want a preview for the game against Wake Forest coming up. Podcast with David Teal, some buy or sell lines for betting. Anything you can think of, we have it on either our socials or the YouTube. A big thank you, as always, to Chris Coleman on set, Nick Brown behind the scenes. I'm Robert Bateman, and we'll see you guys next Friday for the Friday Q&A.